on this computer. All right, I'm recording now. Yay.
Okay, very good.
Thank
Awesome.
you. So today we're going to first thing we're going to do, we're going to debrief a little bit on last time's case study. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it this morning, but I always like to do a little debrief. It's been a couple of weeks. What has settled in? What have you thought? What has risen to the top? You've written your reflections. And so here, I'll be right back. Anybody, since we met last, tell me what you think about the case study, the CAN, the Community Action Network, about metrics for success, what you have to do to show success in a nonprofit organization, qualitative and quantitative. What did you learn? What's something that still sticks out in your mind this morning? That's why I like to do it this way. If you don't have to think about it, what comes to the forefront when you think about that case?
You got to get out front with the organization and shape the message before other people shape it.
There you go. I love it. If you can't define yourself, somebody else will define you. That's the way the world works now, especially in the social media and media age. If you can't own your narrative, somebody else will own you. That's a great point. That may be the biggest thing of the whole thing is you've got to know who you are. You've got to define your narrative. So that's a great one to read, especially if you're in city county government. Especially if you're in city county government, you've got to shape your narrative. And probably the second most important organization is any K-12, but city county government. Why is it so important that you shape your message in city county government, especially like in Reed's case, the police department? What have you got to do every year? You've got to develop a budget and do what? Just go fund it? Can you just fund? Can you fund your own budget? No, just like the school board, you got to go hat in hand and do what?
Ask for money.
Ask for money. That is correct. You got to go hat in hand. Where you got to go to get that money?
The community.
No, you got to go to either county commissioners or your town commissioners, one or the other. Police departments are in North Carolina and South Carolina, and school boards in North and South Carolina are unempowered. Unempowered. What does that mean? We hadn't talked about this. This is the extension of our case study. This is where I like to go with this next. We learned all those things about developing your own metrics and shaping your own message, doing all those things next time. And now here's the practical reason why. Nonprofit organizations are unempowered, whether it's city, county government, police, the parks department, whether it's a public school, they are unempowered. That means they cannot levy taxes.
Mm-hmm.
They have no taxing authority. They can't send people a tax bill. I live here in Cornelius, my primary residence. I get a thing in the mail from the Cornelius Fire Department, and they make it look like it's a bill. I love it. They make it look like it's a bill. But what can I do with that? I can choose to put a check in it and send it back, or I can just throw it away. My residence in Lake Lure, Apple Valley, I get one from the Hickory Nut Gap Fire and Rescue, which is right there on Bills Creek Road, right before you start up the mountain there, go over Bills Mountain. I get one from them and from Bills Creek Fire Department. Now I can choose to put a check in it and send it back, or I can throw it away. They try to make them look like I owe them the money. I love how they adopted that policy. It used to be more of a, hey, how you doing, neighbor? You know, do the right thing. Now they try to make it look like a tax bill. It's not a tax bill, folks. City, county government, volunteer fire departments, paid fire departments, police departments, all those people are unempowered. They have to go to county commissioners or town commissioners with their budget. They have to go through a budget process every year, and they have to go present that budget and ask for that money. And that's why I said before, in Reed's line of work, they have their problem is the dichotomy of, if you go and show that you're doing a great job and your numbers have decreased, it's hard to ask for more money. It's hard to even keep the money you already had. But if you show bad numbers on crime, then folks question your effectiveness again. Same kind of thing that we're talking about is qualitative and quantitative. We run in and say, boy, we've done a great job this year. We've reduced crime by 40%, but we'd like a 20% budget increase. Sometimes that doesn't play well. But you don't want to go in and say, you know, we had a 40% increase in crime this year. We need money. Well, then we question your competence.
And Dr. Lamb, my principal said the other day, because we have a work day on Monday,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of people since the COVID and we've been doing virtual days for snow days, they were saying, well, why can't we have a virtual day on the work day? Because the board is wanting us to come in. And she was saying that when we have virtual days, a lot of teachers are, you know, on Facebook posting pictures. They're at the restaurants, they're shopping or whatever, and it's during working hours. And she said that because the tax money pays our salaries, they have a lot to say about what we're doing on work days. And that's
Of course.
yeah. So I think that has, when you said taxes, that brought that to mind, what she said
Yeah.
the other day.
Well, Dr. Neal works for Department of Public Instruction now, but she just most recently came off of being Principal of the Year in Lincoln County in North Carolina. She's a fabulous elementary school principal during her career. And of course, she's not near as old as me, but very experienced. And I bring that up in that being a principal in a small town, oh my God, everybody's in your business. Everybody's watching you. It's like you can't cuss the cat. You turn around and they're just right there on. You know, it's awful. Now I did that a long time ago. A long time ago, more than 30 years, I did that. But then when I worked out in the woods, as we call it, for, I don't know, what, 17, 18 years before I went to Charlotte. I did another 20 or somehow that I was in Charlotte from 5, 10, 15, 16 years. I did kind of like 16 each. I did half my career out in the woods and half my career in the big town. And I can tell you, the thing about being out in the woods is people watch you like a hawk. They think they act like that's their money. I'm sure Dr. Neal has stories that she can tell. Malia can tell stories this morning about, oh my Lord, about, you know, you have to tell your teachers out in the rural areas. Don't you, if you didn't come to work today, I don't care if you're paying a sub or not, don't you be seen at the Walmart. You do not be, you know, don't you be out until after school hours. I don't care what
You told ours, don't sit by the pool with a drink in your hand and take a picture of it.
Yeah, exactly. Stay off social media, because we're in the budget cycle right now in school. Generally, the schools will have all their budget items in, and the first draft will come from the superintendent about March 1st, Dr. Neal.
Yeah.
About March 1st. So we're kind of in the death rattle here. We're at the end of the cycle. And then it'll go to the superintendent's first budget will be drafted, and then it'll go out, and then the second draft will be about April the 1st. And then the school board will sit and fight and do all the politics, and then it will, but then understanding that the school board, they're just, they don't have any power to, they adopt a budget, they can't fund it, then they got to go over to the county commissioners, or in the 14 city districts across North Carolina, they got to go to the town as well to try to get money. And then it's almost like they start all over again. Whatever priorities they have, they get thrown out.
Yeah,
Again, it's
school
about
boards just have no power to tax. There's only one school district in North Carolina that has that power, and that's Mooresville City.
Yep, they're right there. They're literally right there.
Yep.
They're the only one, and that's a special exemption. But that's a double-edged sword for them. It has driven people out of their town.
Yes.
And so it has driven their population just a little bit further west out 150 toward the lake. So they wanted to do that, and it's ended up being not exactly like they thought it was going to be.
And towards Statesville.
Yeah, and poor
Yes.
states were trying to escape that extra school tax. And so that has been the failed experiment. I don't know how long that will last, if that will keep going or not, but nobody else has been in a hurry since then to do that. It's a failed experiment. So, but understanding, as Reed brought up, you got to shape your message, and part of your message, like Angelique mentioned, and what Dr. Neal was talking about is, part of that message is don't do stupid stuff. Don't be seen out doing things that shed a bad light on your organization or make you seem less effective. And so it's not only, and I love that point, it's not only what you do, it's what you don't do as well.
Yes.
You have to shape your message. That's what's important. All right, so that's probably, as Reed brought up, that's probably the biggie. The second thing, there's a secondary for me on this one, and I mentioned it last time, and it's kind of a pet peeve of mine, and I'll just go ahead into it. For some reason, people think if we just get opposing groups together so that they can talk, that we'll be able to work everything out, that we'll collaborate, that will automatically bring about collaboration. That's just, that'll make you wear a hat and a sign, or a helmet and a sign if you're that dumb. Just getting opposing people together will not fix your problems. It will not, everybody won't automatically see the other person's point of view. You've got to do some prep work with these people. You've got to do professional development with them before you bring them together. It's like I've told you, you never do focus groups in bimodal population. That means warring groups. Because either if you do focus groups, you bring everybody from the same group together, well, that's just an echo chamber. That's just confirmation bias. Or if you bring opposing groups together and you haven't done any prep work, it just ends up being a fist fight. But I don't know why we think that if we just get people together, it reminds me of Coca-Cola commercial from when I was a young man. I'd like to teach the world to sing. Any of y'all ever seen that Coca-Cola commercial? From what, was that from 1970, 69, 68, somewhere in there? Everybody got, the Coca-Cola said if we just got everybody together and had them sing, that we could have world peace. Well, that's a wonderful thought, but I don't know that the people at Coca-Cola, really the people who tell you that, how smart they were at the time, but it's that whole, kumbaya, if we get together, everything will be okay. It won't be. You've got to do some prep work. You've got to, as an organization, you've got to work with your constituent groups to get them ready and prepared to try to come together. And then you've got to do it in a very controlled environment. One of the things that folks have said, and now I'll be the first to acknowledge, I I have no purview on this one because I will say anything at any time to anybody. I don't have a filter. That's not a good thing, whether I'm live or on video. But one of the things that we have discovered during the COVID era and Zoom is people are somewhat more outspoken if they're in a protected environment in their home or wherever, and they're on camera on Zoom. They kind of say things that they might not say in person. And so one of the things that we have to be careful of is when we have, keyboard warriors, when we try to do virtual meetings, it may actually stop the physical fist fight, but in many ways it encourages a bigger verbal conflict. And so again, back to the notion that when we have competing groups or we have competing interests, that we have to do either board development with the board members who have opposing views. And see, that was what happened in the Bertie Greenville case over at the museum is there was opposing views, and they weren't able to accommodate those or didn't understand that. And their educational person, their curator, she had to go because she wasn't smart enough to know that she hadn't brokered kind of a truce between the people on the board. Nobody had done any board development, or you may have to do some community development. You've got to work with these opposing groups to get them to the point where you can then collaborate or compromise, or you can at least accommodate one another. If not, they'll tear your organization apart. That's where I'm headed with this. Your number one job as a leader of an organization is to keep the organization alive. Now, we're talking about a level beyond consultancy now. You folks, when you become leaders, I'm talking about those executive leaders in your organization, you become the leader. Your number one job is to keep your organization alive. Number one. And if you have warring factions, competing groups, if you have constituents that cannot or will not get along, your organization can't survive. And so that's why I always circle back to that. We're not just going to throw people in the room. That's if that happens and they destroy us or we lose our job or whatever, that's on us. We should have been smarter. We've got to do that professional development along the way. And those are the two biggies for me. You got to control your own narrative. You got to come up with your own metrics. But they're based on what your constituents need, and the other, control your message, and do your homework, do your prep work. Those are the things that I took away from that case, that I always take away from that case. We've got another one today. And so I want to go ahead while we're in this vein. All right, who's our first case study this morning? Beverly's group?
Group for life.
Group for life.
All right, share your screen. Let's roll.
All right.
Oh.
All right, team diagnosis and intervention. All right, we're rolling.
All right. Case study 216A, team diagnosis and intervention. I'm Sean Perry here with Reed Rollins, Beverly Rufty, and Talia Doughton. And this is Group for Life. Introduction. This particular case study provided both qualitative and quantitative data collected from a survey completed by the team, which was led by John. The quantitative data highlighted that the team knows their contribution to the organization's goal. The members have a clear understanding of their role on the team, and that the team has clear goals. The qualitative data revealed that the team is a high-performing, top-tier team in their work and achieving those team goals. Utilizing descriptive statistics and a mixed methodology approach, our team analyzed the survey data and prepared a plan of action to address the central problem identified in this analysis. We came to the conclusion that culture was the central problem as identified by the weaknesses in the data analysis, which was lack of trust and team encouragement, which negatively impacts the culture. Simon Sinek highlights how Navy SEALs are evaluated on performance versus trust in his book, The Infinite Game, and that culture is the combination of values and behavior. I want to share with you a statement from the book that was made by a Navy SEAL. He stated, "I may trust you with my life, but do I trust you with my money or my wife?"
These are the secondary problems that we identified in the case study through our analysis of both quantitative and qualitative data. Quantitative data shows that the following questions ranked the lowest on the team survey. Question 6, our team meetings are effective. Question 9, team meeting members handle conflicts openly. And question 11, team members encourage each other to do their best. Some of the other data, sorry, let me get my. Some of the qualitative data showed the same pattern as the quantitative data, while some of it shed light on other secondary problems the team was experiencing. Comments such as, "John has been a great leader of this team. I think we have great potential, but some negative members of the team bring us down in meetings with pessimistic attitudes." And another comment, "I wish I knew more about what other members of the team were doing. We have some updates in staff meetings, but they are too brief to get much detail." Showed how ineffective meetings and communication are on the team. Some of the comments show that there's favoritism on this team, such as this comment, "This is a fine team to be on if you're a member of John's inner circle. Otherwise, you will be ignored." And another comment, "This team is cliquish. This is a core group of them that excludes the rest of us." One comment shows a lack of trust and support. "We don't support each other as a team. I don't think anyone here has my back if I'm struggling. To be honest, I don't trust a single one of them." Another comment shows a lack of initiative on team member parts. "We wait until John makes decisions and announces them rather than taking the initiative. I would like to see us make more decisions by consensus." Next slide, please. Additional problems with case study 16A have to do with the actual survey itself. Is this team survey reliable? Is it valid? Validity has to do with, does the survey measure what it's supposed to measure? Reliability has to do with the consistency of a test over time or across forms. We have, as a team, some concerns with the validity and the reliability of the survey, and we will be discussing these concerns later in our presentation. Administrative method. How is this team survey administered? We don't have any indication of who administered the survey, and if it was John, the leader, or an external consultant, or even a team member. We need this information to determine its validity. Since the administrative method is unknown, we can't be sure that the data isn't skewed. We noticed that question number 5 on the survey, "I am proud to be a member of this team," had only 10 responses, but all the other questions had 12 responses. This is considered a non-response, which we will discuss later in our presentation. Another one of our concerns about the survey is it is a 5-question survey versus a 4-question survey. A 5-question survey, such as this one, that includes a response like neither agree nor disagree, leaves a neutrality that can go either way. A more reliable instrument, such as a 4-question survey, would essentially force the middle of the road participants to pick a side and either disagree or agree. Which side of the fence are they on? Do they lean more toward disagree or agree? In testing and public education, bubble students who are borderline on the test scores get provided interventions and little nuggets to get them across the line. But a lot of time and effort is also spent in reinforcing those who are already achieving. But if there's a loss in performance, they slide backwards. In this scenario, we would want to identify where the neutrality would be on a side, and we'd be able to more effectively plan actions to address the need. How does this example relate to our survey? If we had a 4-question survey, we could eliminate that neutrality in the exact same way. Next slide, please. We would love for everyone on the team to be able to honestly answer the open-ended questions similar to the one positive comment on the survey, which is we consistently achieve our team goals and are always on top. We can do this by changing the culture of the team. Our first goal, our main key goal. In order to change the culture, we must address all the low-scoring questions, such as question 6. Our team meetings are effective. Excuse me. Question 9, team members handle conflicts openly. And question 11, team members encourage each other to do their best. By addressing those and addressing all of the qualitative problems previously mentioned, we have come up with this list of goals which impact the overall culture of the team. Our goals are to work on trust, initiative, conflict management, effective team meetings, and communication. We want to improve the leadership and encourage all the team members to participate. We want to reduce favoritism and try to eliminate the cliquishness by encouraging a whole team approach. And lastly, mentors is another great goal that will benefit this team. If we can work on all these goals, then we will change the culture, which is really the central problem in our main key goal. So by changing the culture, we will create a work environment where team members feel safe to be open and honest about their concerns and where they support one another as members of a team. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Bev. Group 4 chose to assess this data in a mixed methodology approach that pushes both the qualitative and quantitative data through the confines of a convergent theory. John's team took an assessment on the ideas of teamwork in the organization. The assessment identified there were some organizational concerns. These concerns were specifically derived from a survey tool with open-ended questions. I had a lot of questions with the testing instrument early on in my personal assessment, and these questions still exist even after the group study. The 16A case study did not detail how these tools were administered. The survey pool dealt with 12 people, which limits the power of the statistical analysis and really limits the statistical significance on the data set. There's also questions like Bev talked about with number 5 and non-response, where 10 employees only answered. This directly relates back to the validity and the reliability of the test. The non-disclosure of any previous information or current information causes doubt to be brought on the testing and its value towards research. On a positive note, the survey used a Likert scale, which significantly helped with our quantitative analysis. Valuable information was retrieved from the survey tool and the quasi-interview question. The useful data that we were able to get from the survey is the mode, which talks about questions 6, 9, and 11. These were issues for employees, and this is how we were able to do our action plan and our goals for it. The 3 questions dealt with quality of work meetings, conflict management, and team encouragement. The interview question identified John had an inner circle with authoritarian leadership, and that there was a lack of organizational staff updates. When comparing the quantitative data and qualitative data in a convergence perspective, they did not match up. The only perspective between the 2 tools that matched up dealt with meetings. So as we start looking at this data, in our academic books, it talked about displaying data in different forms. So what we're looking at with this self-reported data, and I call it self-reported data because I think that's what John did, was issued a survey and then self-reported. And Dr. Lamb talks about self-reported data as being the most unreliable information, obviously, that we can get because it's biased, and it's biased towards the people that are reporting it. So when we look at this display, you see the information displayed in 2 different forms. You get the bar graph, which Bev said that's what she really relates to. And then you get this Excel spreadsheet, which really sort of makes my OCD feel really well. So when we look at these numbers, we're talking about a range. We're talking about a range of 11, which is going to come back to us when we start working through some of the statistical analysis. Bev talked earlier about reliability and validity. We've got some real questions here because of some of the information, how it was put together, how it was identified with the numbers. A big part of it was some of the weighted scales, how they numbered the responses and things of that sort. So when we look at these data points, we identify that they're independent variables and that we understand that the sample size is somewhat small, and that's going to really affect some of the statistical power that we're going to try to get from this. If you can go to the next slide, please, Sean. So now we're going to get into the responses. Let me move my window around a little bit. So when we talk about group responses, we're going to actually talk about how it was spread out between the strongly disagree, the disagree, the basically no opinion, agree, and strongly agree. So we see that it's 26, 31, 73. We start talking about the frequencies of these responses, and we see that there's a long tail to the right, which is leptocuratic, which means it's got a strong peak to the right, and it actually leans over there to the right. So it means that the answers and the group push more to the agree, and it doesn't really display a true bell-shaped curve on this. All right, Sean, if you'll go to the next for me. So as we look at these numbers in the Excel spreadsheet, we start looking at the numbers of modes. I think Dr. Lamb talked about when we do surveys in this group that we're really going to identify modes. I identified the modes by the color of the number, which is yellow. And we came up with number 6, number 9, and number 11. And that, again, is how we do our action plan. Some of the biggest issues that we sort of debated in this case study talked about the survey itself. When you look at the survey, they had numbers across the top, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And we didn't really know if that was supposed to be a number or if that actually was supposed to be a weight. But when we analyzed the numbers, we analyzed them without them being weighted. And if you look at the standard deviation on this is 1.9, which means it's really centered closely around the mean. So they're really close to the mean on the testing part of it. When we look at the highest part of the mean, we see number 3. And that's going to come back to what Beverly was talking about. Question number 5, not forcing an answer. And I think that's what pushed the numbers up and caused some false information or caused some false ranges for us. Standard deviation. The standard deviation, again, is 1.9. The highest standard deviation was job satisfaction. And that's a no opinion kind of deal there. When we talk about variant, which is just a doubling of the standard deviation, we saw the mean variant was 3.1, which means just a separation between the numbers. So they're still pretty close as far as the answers. When we look at the comparative nature with the quantitative and qualitative, we see the written responses weren't planned out very well. And when we evaluated, we thought that the group could have done a better approach on this and could have gotten better responses so that they correlate better. Group 4 assessed the data and determined, that John's team are high achievers. He has a click. He works top down with no employee input, and he doesn't update the team. So Group 4 viewed that the survey data and a convergence perspective didn't match up except for the favoritism. Do you guys have any questions? I know I went through a lot. Specifically, do you want me to answer anything with the numbers that I went through before we move on to the next slide?
I'll circle back and we'll talk about these in a minute. Go right ahead.
Okay. Next slide, please.
These team building interventions are techniques and activities designed to elevate team trust, performance, and collaboration. The goal is to equip the employees with the right tools and skills to build team encouragement along with managing conflicts. Excuse me. The first intervention is activity-based, which involves outdoor or adventurous activities that take the team outside of their comfort zone. The team partakes in physical challenges and obstacles. For example, what we have on here is the rope courses and our favorite, the trust fall, which encourages the team to focus on their teamwork, problem solving, trust, and risk taking. The second intervention, personality-based team building, aims to help team members develop their interpersonal skills, where each team member can take a personality test and their results are then shared with the rest of the team. So the example we gave is the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator Assessment, which is designed to help people understand personality in different general populations and be able to know their strengths and blind spots within the organization and learn how they differ from others and able to work together. The next one is skill-based team building. This follows a workshop type of structure with training that instructs the team members on specific skills. So for example, John may need some type of leadership workshop, whereas the rest of the team may need to attend a workshop based off communication. Then the workshop proceeds into activities where the teams practice what they've learned and they develop an action plan to help them continuously improve upon the skills and practices that they were doing there. The last one is a problem-solving based team building, which involved team members working together to solve a specific problem that is usually directly tied to a current roadblock that the team may be facing within the organization. In this case, 16A, we chose conflict management and teamwork to be their focus. And within these sessions, that they should allow these employees to explore and analyze the conflict together and also discover a solution together. The teams may also decide to conduct this intervention outside of the workplace just to make it a little bit outside of their daily distractions and kind of focus specifically on whatever their task is. And although the timeline shows specific dates and times for us to do these things, we also agree that these should be an annual updated team building activities that they could probably benefit from if they do it maybe, once a year or once every couple of years. Next slide, please. The other interventions would be realigning the team members, which involves a shared vision and includes mutual respect and in-depth understanding of each other's role within the project with the goal of achieving effective outcomes. As the leader, John should try more to encourage collaboration between the departments within the organization by structuring the team's interactions with other members that work in other departments. In order to convey this, the company's internal structure needs to be detailed by the roles and responsibilities along with the relationships between all the individuals. And by looking at the company's organizational chart or creating one, if they don't have one, and looking at it so that people can gain a quick understanding of where each employee fits into the organization with the ability to make decisions and solve problems as a group together. Some of the most effective decision-making processes include building a consensus within everyone in the group. Last is communication. And communication with collaboration actually go hand in hand. Sometimes business may need a tune-up to maximize their talking and their open conversation, and their so they can be able to have a space where they can confront each other or talk about any type of conflicts and not feel any type of judgment or feel left out, as some of the comments that Beverly mentioned in the study, that they feel is there's some type of inner group. They need to be amongst employees and teams together. So as a leader, John should make sure that the employees are connected socially through any type of media, the social media, or weekly emails, by sharing that information and knowledge with bulletin boards and other visuals that can help boost communication. And having these meetings where the discussions are effective, seeing your coworkers face to face is also a great way to foster teamwork. And these things should also be ongoing activities. Next slide, please. Garbage in, garbage out is a well-known phrase that we've came across based off the computer-based data. And the data there, if the data is used in analysis are not reliable, then the results will not be proven to be useful. An employee culture survey measures the point of view of employees and is designed to assess whether it aligns with that of the organization. Employee engagement surveys measure employees' commitment. It measures their motivation, the sense of purpose and passion for their work, and especially the organization. Without good data, you cannot have a good analysis. So this team really needs to thoroughly review the results of these surveys and interview questions and reflect, so that when they take it again, they'll have more improved scores and comments that are more positive towards the leadership. They should be able to set intentions and provide transparent communication, be able to target areas of improvement and establish specific plans, and then execute those plans, and later on be able to evaluate the progress that they've made. Next slide, please.
All
Excellent
right.
work, Team for Life. This is our references. This presentation was prepared in Google Slides. And since the case study dealt with teams, we chose the game day theme. And now we'll open the floor for any comments and questions. Thank you.
All right, if you will back your slide up
Thank you.
till we get to your data analysis slide that had your means and standard deviations. And then I'll get started here. That one, yeah,
This one right here?
that one will be fine.
Okay.
All right. So what is the design of this study? You said it's mixed methodology. I heard that. All right. Within mixed methodology, is this a convergent design, an explanatory design, or an exploratory design?
So I think they're exploring what actually is going on. So they're trying to figure out maybe what some of the issues are.
Well, they're going to do that, but this is what we would refer to as a convergent design. We've got quantitative, the survey, and then we ask qualitative questions, and we're comparing the two to see if they tell us the same story. They do not tell us the same story. That's the problem. So then when we see that the story is not consistent, we have to go in and try to figure out why. The first problem is, as you pointed out, is they have a neither agree nor disagree column. And so what we generally do is we really need to be concerned with mode. Who answered agree and who answered disagree? And if we take that neither agree nor disagree column and we move that to the disagree, as we should, what we find is all of a sudden We don't have one group of 12. We've got two groups of 6.
Right.
Now you say, but you're forcing it. Now, I'm not, trust me, people are not on the fence. You've just provided them a way to hide on the survey, that they're not on the fence. Their comments tell you they're not on the fence, but you have given them a way, you know, on the survey to hide their true feelings or disguise them. And so what we see is there's two groups of 6 here. That's mode. We're more interested in a survey like this. We're more interested in how many agree and how many disagree. At how much they agree or disagree is not really the issue here. We're looking how many agree and how many disagree. It's 6 and 6. Now the problem when we start trying to do measures of central tendency, and even is that if we just look at the mean average, you know, the numbers don't look bad. They don't tell us that story. But what tells us that story is standard deviation. On a 5-point scale, if you've got a standard, what is standard deviation? That's one of your measures of variability. That's the average distance from the mean. If we've got half of them one way and half the other, the mean's going to kind of be in the middle. You say, well, everybody's just kind of ambivalent. No, some are real happy and some are real sad. What in this data set tells me that? Standard deviation. On a 5-point scale, if you've got a standard deviation of more than 1, that's the average distance from the mean. If you've got a standard deviation of more than 1, that means you've got a wider dispersion of scores. That means that they're one way or the other, pretty far away from that mean. It tells you you have a bimodal population. And if you look at the standard deviation on every question is more than 1. That means that your data it's a bimodal, that you got one way over here to the right and one way to the left. You got a bunch, half of them agree and half of them disagree. That's what your data actually tells you. If they were all kind of clustered together, your standard deviation would be less than 1. That you've got some standard deviations that are more than 2 on a 5-point scale, they're at either end. They're at either end. They are not happy. That matches what their comments say here, is you've got a bimodal population. Half are on one end, half are on the other end. And if we average them together, it just looks like, well, it's okay. This is a way to disguise data that makes it not look nearly as bad as it really is. Now, that's just bad technique. That's number one. The data is not reliable because we used a scale that allowed us to kind of decide that. But again, when we do survey data like this, what we're really most interested in is how many agree and how many disagree. The mode, that's what we're really interested in. But again, your statistics are very good here in that standard deviation column tells us that same story, that we have a bimodal population. On a scale of 1 to 5, if your standard deviation is above 1 for any questions, that means your numbers are way far apart. Even though the average might be kind of down the middle. If you average 1 and 5, you get 2.5, or you get 3. And so you've got to dive deeper into your numbers here. But again, your mode will tell you that. And you say, well, my mode doesn't tell me much of that. You know, that's because you got to count neither an agree nor disagree as a disagree. When you do that, your picture becomes very clear that it's 6 and 6. As you said, John's got his own little clique. He's got his own little group. They are a high functioning team in spite of that. But you can't get bogged down in the analysis in terms of averages don't tell you the real story. Again, when we talk about measures of central tendency, average is used the most. But in survey mode, when we're doing a satisfaction, agree, disagree surveys, mode is what really is most important. Mode is most important. And when we talk about mode, that's simply the number that agree and the number that disagree. To what extent, not really that important. And so when we look at it through that lens, we see that this is kind of a 6 and 6. So I'm going to go to Leslie for a moment. Leslie, tell us what a toxic culture is.
A toxic culture is when you have a leader that's very dominant and causes everyone in the group to not perform at their highest level.
That is correct. And so what we have here would be known as a toxic culture. We talk about culture, it's very important. Culture eats organization for lunch every day. And so John has his clique or his group. They're getting their needs met. The other half of the group are not getting theirs. It becomes a toxic culture, which we can talk about later today, where that leads us and some of the other things that happen. And so, but we have to be really careful that we are able to identify something like toxic culture in this particular case. John is the central problem. That the organization is high function is in spite of John, not because of John. It's in spite of John, and that happens sometimes.
Dr. Lamb.
Yes.
She said that a leader is dominant. I'm kind of experiencing the same thing with one that's not dominant and that
Yes.
is kind of reclusive and almost not engaged.
Yeah.
And so I'm seeing the same thing with our toxic environment that I'm working in.
Yeah.
And what recently he had refused to pay for tutoring for ELA and all the EOC testing groups at the beginning of the year. He refused to pay for tutoring. Well, our scores bombed, obviously. And they're going to bomb anyway, probably because of loss of learning due to COVID, but not on that level.
Yeah.
And he said he wasn't going to pay the teachers when we went back and requested, paying tutors. He said he wasn't going to pay them because they were not inspired. And he didn't tell me this because I would have came back with a different response. But the department head kind of relayed that to me, and she was asking me for help, trying to figure out how we could circumvent and provide enrichment for the ELA kids. And I asked her, I said, did you go back and flip the script and say, well, are you inspired? Because he doesn't leave his office. I would have put it right back on him. Performance reflects leadership. And so it's crazy to me that this juggle that we're in and this cycle of just, I don't know what you call it, just lack of work ethic, I guess, really.
Yeah. Well, making a no decision is making a decision.
Right.
And obviously that group is not a part of his clique that feeds him. I'll just use him, pejoratively. I assume to be a man, but
yeah,
but he's having his needs met, or his group is having his needs met, and that's part of toxic culture. Is that this is my group. I facilitate my group. I punish the folks on the other side, and that's what we're talking about, toxic leadership here. But you can't get to that if you get caught up in your numbers, the average, because if we average, that's how you can, drown in 3 feet of water. Well, it's 6 foot deep on one end, and it's 1 foot deep on the other. But we drowned as organizations in shallow water because it's not really shallow.
right.
We average it out, and toxic leaders, they only do for their group, and then everybody else, that they don't do for them. It becomes a reward punishment function. If you're part of my group, I see about you, but if you're not part of my group, I punish you. If you're part of my group, you're informed and you know what's going on. And if you're not, you're on the other end. It's always happening to you instead of with you. And that's all big parts of toxic leadership. And so, as I've told you, the correct answer in case studies in 738 is never, I don't have enough data. We have more than enough data here that tells us we have a bimodal population, that half the people are happy because they're on John's clique, and the other half are angry and not getting their needs met. If we simply look at the mode. Now, the survey is as an unreliable survey. It doesn't really show us, the questions are valid, but the way that it was administered through the scale gives us bad information. And then we're conflicted. We don't know how to reconcile that. They're telling us one thing, but the numbers tell us another. And so what we end up with is that inactivity. I don't have enough information to make a decision. You have more than enough information to make a decision if you know how to analyze your data. If you know, mode's what matters here. How many people are happy and how many people are mad? Well, it's about 6 and 6. What do the comments tell us? Well, it's about 6 and 6. And so it's 6 and 6. That's what you should find out from this. If you just simply look at mean average, then it doesn't tell you any kind of a story. And if you don't know that's the wrong thing to look at, and that the survey is unreliable, then you as a decision maker are ambivalent about what to do. And then generally what happens is you don't do anything. Now, as we have found out, you can stop your share now. As you have found out, you said, but Deol, this is a high performing team. But what happens is turnover, lack of retention. That's where this goes, folks. I'm gonna tell you that when we fast forward to the bottom line here, is all of a sudden those 6 people, again, back to Hertzberg, everything always comes back to Hertzberg. When you come back to Hertzberg, it's all about staying and going. The things that make us stay are not the things that make us go. They're two, satisfaction and dissatisfaction are 2 different things. They are not a continuum. The things that make us stay are not the things that make us go. The things that we're talking about, toxic environment, are the things that make you go. Just because you're a high performing team, that won't make you stay. And then you will go. And as we have found out in the last 2 years with the great resignation that Ben's working on, these are the kinds of situations, and you say, why in the world did that person leave? They're doing so well over there. No, they're not doing well over there. These are the kinds of things that you got to be more in tune to now than ever before in the history of organization. There's a reason why people are leaving their jobs hand over fist. It's because of toxic environment. They're not having their needs met. One of the things that we talk about in the school business in K-12 all the time in terms of Hertzberg is a good principal. A principal cannot be a satisfier, which is a mid-level manager. A principal cannot be a satisfier, but they can be a dissatisfier. That's what Hertzberg tells us. John can't be a satisfier in this one, but he can be a dissatisfier. And I can tell you right now what would happen just in a short period of time in today's environment with data like this. You'd see 6 people gone here pretty quickly. And then how effective is your team going to be? How high performing are they going to be? I mean, folks are doing their job. They are high performing, but what they're also doing, they're on LinkedIn and Indeed, they're looking for jobs right now. 6 people are now looking for jobs, actively pursuing another job right now. And it's just going to be a matter of time until you're going to lose all 6 of them. So in the end, well, you can, what's wrong with John? What are you going to do with John? Your action plan that you've got in terms of team building and trust falls and ropes courses, you identified that some things that you can do to try to build this team. but will it work with John? John's having his needs met. All right, let's circle back to social systems theory, Getzell's GUBA. What the organization needs for you to do every day has to be what you want or are willing to do every day. Is John making sure that the organization is getting their needs met as the leader of this group? He is not. He's making sure that his needs get met. But that's not what the organization needs from him. The organization doesn't need for him to alienate half of his team. That's counterproductive for the organization. He's going to have a retention problem. Now, here's the thing. You say, well, he'll go out and get 6 more people that he wants, but it won't matter if they're not part of his inner circle. And do we really want somebody creating a clique within our organizations, and doing the personal power, exercising personal power, and doing this dominant culture, this toxic culture? What does that do to organizations when you do that? Brianna says we're absolutely, I think it says, imploding, I'm guessing is the next word. This is exactly what happens. Your organization implodes. And one of the things that you've got to understand, if you're one of those people that's in John's clique, it's, that's all well and good till something goes bad. It's all fun and games till somebody gets their eye put out. And then all of a sudden he comes after you. I don't know why folks can't understand in a situation like this, 6 and 6, that he's wearing the other 6 out. Do you think that you'll get a pass when things don't turn out well? He'll treat you just like he treats them. That's one of the things that, I don't get about people is that, you get a leader in and you get people that are in their clique and boy, everything's going well. And they're wearing the other half of the organization out, and you're like, oh, it's good to be me. I'm on the good team. But what happens when you bring bad news? All of a sudden you're on the out as well. There should be no in or out in organizations. Everybody should be in. If you have a leader that has a group that's out, then that's not leadership. That's just an exercise in narcissism and personal power. That's all that is. That's just a toxic culture. So in the end, what do you do with John? Dr. Neil travels around for DPI, and she kind of does this. This is exactly what she does. She goes in and assesses organizations and then tries to work with that leader. Dr. Neil, tell us about the real world.
The real world is not pretty. The real work is trying to get folks to change their mindset is difficult. Organizations are complex as they are in private and public sectors and schools. They rely on a lot of links and pieces, and you really have to have a strong leader that has a strong vision. And that's where I'm seeing more success is in schools that have a leader with a true vision. It's the schools that are struggling. The leader doesn't have a true vision of where they want their school to go and what they want it to be. And I don't see a lot of, people who don't care. They're worn down and frustrated. It's been a long couple of years now through this pandemic, and it's overwhelming to a lot of them. They're tired.
Yeah, and they seek comfort in their groups. That is correct.
Yes.
There's a lot of
much
comfort
so.
in that. Except that means that only that group has any kind of a vision. Everybody else is just floundering.
the teacher working condition survey, which is one of the most extensive surveys that I'm aware of that's been
Mhm.
given over a long period of time, is starting March 1st and through the whole month of March. I think it's going to be very telling as to where we are in North Carolina with our teachers as we compare that data to years past.
Mhm.
But
And I'm sorry, go right ahead.
you know, that's a survey though that I think does in many ways do a good job capturing where teachers feel school organizations are. And they've changed it, you know, very little over time so that they can truly compare it year after, well, every 2 years they give it. So I am very anxious to see. I think a lot of principals are a little anxious themselves. And I think we have to take some of that pressure off and not, if it's not going well, we can't point it all to the fingers at the principal. I
Yeah,
think we have, it's not their fault totally. No, you know, some cases there are, but I think we've got to look at it at a lens with a larger vision than pointing fingers as to whose fault it is if the results aren't so good. But principals get very nervous about the teacher working condition survey.
there's 12 sections in that survey. The one that is most relevant is school leadership. There is a section on school leadership. And that one would identify problems exactly like what we're talking about today. So the survey and the follow-up open-ended questions are kind of what you would get in the school leadership section of the teacher working conditions survey. And it would be relevant to the leader. These are things that would be relevant to that, to the characteristics, to the actions, to the behavior of the leader. And so the group that just presented, you know, the Fab Four here that just presented, just, you know, for life here.
Group for life.
You know, they've got some professional development for John. And you know, that is a that's a minimum, but I'm going to posit a different tack.
Dr. Lamb,
Yes.
if that prevent with the cycle that we go through, you know, this is the initial phases, but you know, we're obviously going to assess how that professional development works. And if at some point we realize that John's not going to grow, then he's going to go.
Well, see, you're a better person than me, Sean. We already knew that. I'm old and grumbling. See, John's got to go for me right now.
Yeah. Well, it depends, because a lot of people think our principal needs to go, but the district's not willing to buy him out.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's part of it. But understanding an organization, back to toxic culture, and I'm gonna have Leslie talk about that again. See, here's why you say, well, you know, Deol, can you not try to improve him? But one of the things that we've learned in the last 5 years, maybe 4 or 5 years, that we've learned is these folks who have created these toxic cultures, that's just the tip of the iceberg. See, what I'd be, you know, if I were back in my old job, and this was one of my principals, I'd be really afraid of what's going to come out next. Every day I'd be worried about what other shoe is going to drop, because toxic culture is kind of, yeah, we're going to take a break for the next group. Toxic culture is just a gateway to more abuses and more things that are much more serious nature. What I worry about and would worry about in a case like this, if John's doing this publicly, what's he doing privately? What kind of relationships and what other things that he has? And I'll just tell you, it's hard in nonprofits it's hard to survive scandals because you're basically working on public trust. And Leslie, I hadn't prompted her on this. Leslie, talk about toxic culture, the outward part, but what you see in a case like this.
Well, I was just going to use a practical example. I worked in the school system for 17 years and never saw one person let go ever. I moved to the community college and I can count on more than 2 hands the number of people who maybe this is not a fit for you, this is not going to work out, and people just leave like right and left. So there's just some kind of either stigma or there's some kind of just something that we're not able as leaders in the school system to stand up and say, this is just not working out. We've offered you these things, but this is not for you. And the students are the ones that are suffering. But dramatic difference in 2 places that I've worked where no one was ever let go. And you knew this teacher, this principal, this person was not doing the job, was not putting forth effort. And then I work at another place and people are just moving on.
Yeah, and that was
It's
a
too
dichotomy.
hard in schools.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the dichotomy is there's a lot of bad things going on. And you must be willing to move on from those people. And part of it, and this is not in the case study, but I always worry in toxic cultures, I always worry that there's some kind of sexual misconduct or abuse or other things underneath the surface. We're finding out more and more about these leaders in these organizations. How many of you think fall from grace recently? They were, this and that and the other, but then come to find out their personal behavior, it didn't stop with just a little abuse around the office. It turned into so much more than that. That now we're finding out all of these things that you can't just separate those. Well, they're just doing that publicly. They're still good people. No, they're not. It doesn't stop. And so I would worry that John is doing other things. But to Leslie's point, there has to be a line you draw that we can't allow that. What is your line? We can't do. My line is when you start forming cliques, when you start doing those, we can't use you in our organization. That's a no for me. We can't have cliques within our organization, and we can't have a toxic culture where half the employees are angry all the time. We can't have those things. We cannot make it as an organization. All right, we're going to take our first break. We'll be back at 10:30, and we'll start with our next group. Good job this morning. Thank you.
Very good job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Category, 50% of them agree that they're not share that they were not proud members of their team. And so, and we recognize, right, with dissatisfied team members, lack of trust, you begin to lose folks are not going to be retained within your organization. Folks are less likely to take risk within the organization as well to better the organization. And so those were some of the secondary problems that we were able to conclude.
Good morning again, everybody. And so with our team, we thought about possible solutions. So based on the qualitative and quantitative data obtained to help us come to the central problem, the other thing that we also did look at was Bowman and Deol's 4 frames, because some of the data, even though we were able to kind of extrapolate, our findings, we wanted to be sure that we were leaving no stone unturned. And so when we looked at Bowman and Deol's 4 frames, we looked at the structural, HR, political, and symbolic. And we wanted to make sure that if there were any underlying problems that we could kind of catch them in the rinse in terms of being able to identify any other underlying situations. And so from the data and the analysis, it allowed us to focus on possible solutions and be really intentional about the recommendations that we were making that would have the greatest impact on the leader and as a team. And so when we looked at essential strategies for doing this, we looked at communication training and just trying to create an environment that would be psychologically safe. And so when we talked about possible improvements, we selected doing icebreakers simply because it establishes a connection with the team. It helps us to kind of get to know people, perhaps reduce some of the stress associated with being in an unhealthy work culture. And hopefully there would be some fun or some positive aspect that they would enjoy. We looked at team building to increase the motivation, to certainly recognize and develop individual strengths that may come out of the activities within the team building exercises. And the hope is that it would also affect the morale of those that were participating in this particular activity. We thought about doing an office retreat because it would build and hopefully bond the team. And I know that myself as a leader of an organization, one of the things that we did was we took our administrative staff to the Grove Park Inn in Asheville, North Carolina, and it was a very relaxed atmosphere. And what we found is that, aside from staff believing that it was a great experience, of course, we got to learn a lot about each other, and some of those positive vibes that we had there, we were able to bring back to the workplace. We talked about leadership training. And we thought that because everybody is an integral part of the team, that we needed to do leadership training related to both the big L's in terms of positional leader, which is John, as well as the little L's, which is the all of the remaining 12 respondents, because everybody in their own right certainly can be a leader in the team and contribute. And part of the toxic work culture is that people are not feeling a part. So if we lent training in terms of leadership development, the hope is that there would certainly have some additional positive feedback from what they were experiencing in their work environment. When we looked at John, we felt like because he was at the helm and he was the leader of some of the toxicity. Well, he was responsible for the toxicity, actually. We thought that it would be important to develop a personal development leadership plan so that he could develop his skills. And one of the things that we talked about was that if upon developing these professional leadership skills, when we re-administered the survey again in 3 months, if we did not see marked improvement, then he would be removed from the position. So when we talked about kind of overarching things that we would do, and in our plan and actions related to the interventions that we would do, we just got really specific because we thought that these were things that would really improve the overall workplace. And so we talked about having team meetings where it would promote leadership, communication and collaboration, and then also an opportunity to bond, because one of the problems is that it's a toxic work culture. And so Shine kind of talks about, artifacts and, these symbolic things that we could do in terms of gestures to kind of help the team to bond. And so we thought that that would be a really significant thing in terms of having scheduled meetings to ensure that everyone was able to be a part and took part in all of the things, because our data had pointed out that sometimes people just waited until John made a decision and then they just followed through. So this would be a way that the organization could be inclusive. And we had also kind of just talked about creating like an affinity group so that there would be a place where there could be collaboration and talking, and hopefully the things that they created in that group would come to the larger group in the team meetings. We also looked at Johari's window, because with Johari's window, this is a technique, and as a counselor, I really love it simply because it allows us to have a certain level of self-awareness. Um, before we can lead others, we have to be able to lead ourselves. And so Johari's window allows for us to have self-awareness, recognition of strengths as well as struggles. It promotes open communication, and channels for people to kind of talk about different things, because perception can be kind of tricky. And so it's real important that, with Johari's window, we can build trust, have better understanding of the team and its members. And, what's important is that, how we see ourselves and how others perceive us may be a key in terms of how well someone can interact with another person. We also looked at doing psychogeometrics. We thought that this was a good way for the team to engage in a scientific understanding of others. Psychogeometric consists of you aligning yourself with a specific shape simply because those shapes will share with others, how you handle tasks, what your work ethic is, and your beliefs, values, and attitudes in terms of approaches related to working conditions. So for example, I'm a circle, and circles indicate that, we are effective communicators. Uh, Overall, we wanted to make sure that with all of these interactions that we were able to improve, our communication style, make sure that we understood that, teams have both positive and negative traits, and really rely on our positive traits. As a consultant, we wanted to make sure that when we were sharing this information with John and his team, that they understood that although we selected these specific activities, understanding that, we always, there are benefits and risks to anything that we do. We wanted to make sure that they understood the pros and cons of it. And sometimes even when we are creating these great ideas about what things we can do, sometimes we have to consider the barriers. So for example, with office retreat and learning leadership skills, the pros is that they will be able to learn new skills, build unity and trust, and perhaps even decrease stress within the toxic environment. But we also have to consider, that there's going to be need for ongoing support to continue to do this. And with all of these things that we kind of talked about, one, it's time consuming. Also, there's cost involved. We have to make sure that when people are participating, that they're participating wholeheartedly, and not just kind of going along with the system. And, at the end of the day, the goal is to make sure that they understand the risk factors if they're going to kind of embark on some of these things that we recommend, because at the end of the day, we want the team to be more effective. We want the morale to be in its appropriate place, because understanding with the data that we've collected that it's essential for the team to be cohesive, because if it continues to be toxic, that there's going to be, perhaps high turnover or poor performance related to the team's output. When we talk about what that plan looks like, as a consultant, we certainly want to have the initial meeting with the team. We want to plan the weekend retreat, and we want to make sure that after every activity, there's an opportunity to debrief so that we can see if there's progress or lack of progress. We certainly wanted to make sure that the team meetings took place on a quarterly basis, whereas the affinity groups would meet on a monthly basis so that they could bring the information back to the larger group. And this would kind of start after the retreat was had. And then also just kind of re-administering the survey at quarterly meetings, because it's important for us to have continuous assessment of the things that we have identified, because the goal is to have continuous improvement, and we can't improve if we're not collecting the data and understanding what's happening when we're implementing these things that we recommend.
And just to sort of sum everything up, as I mentioned earlier, we did use qualitative and quantitative data, which is mixed methodology, and that allowed us to really determine the central and secondary problem that sort of drove our decision by really looking at the mode. And we recognize that unhealthy work culture and lack of team cohesion can force members of an organization to not be proud to work with their organization. And we know through that, right, that forces lesser productivity. Members are not willing to take risk when they're in an unhealthy work culture. In addition to that, right, when we notice that the leader is sort of causing this unhealthy work culture, a decision needs to be made, right? We either get rid of the leader to hopefully improve our productivity in the culture, or we allow members, if we keep the leader, right, it forces members out. And sometimes we just gotta get rid of the leader. Someone needs to go for the organization to grow. And so that sort of concludes our presentation.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Couple more themes here. Looking at this from two perspectives, one as a consultant, one as a leader in the organization. Please remember, as a consultant, your job is to do the analysis and come up with recommendations and an action plan, which you folks just did. It was very good. And so, but remembering that what you need to understand, either as the leader that's kind of, John's boss, or the consultant, that everybody in the organization at the highest decision making level has to understand is this plan will only work if we move John out. I mean, that has to be understood from the very beginning. If we leave John in place, what we risk, and this is the point that I want to make, if we leave John in place and we put this action plan with all this team building and all these things, you run the risk of people of punishing the victim. John's the problem, and we got to do all this work. You're doing all this to us, and he's the problem. That's punishing the victim. Now, if you move John out and then you do these things, then they'll be received as intended. But why are you beating on me? Why you want me to do X, Y, and Z? Because when we go back to work tomorrow, the conditions haven't changed. John's going to enforce his will upon us, and we're going to be doing the same things we always did. You're just punishing us. You're putting us through the ringer. And so that has to be understood either from a senior leadership or as a consultant. Everybody has to understand that we can do all these wonderful activities and team building, and we can have plans, and we can go in cycles of professional development. But that won't help if the conditions the working conditions don't change. If John's here, that's just punishing the victim. And that training will not be received in the spirit that it was intended. Why are you making me do this? I'm not your problem. Why don't you address the actual problem rather than me? Because everybody knows you've got 6 people who know, and actually all 12 know what the problem is. But 6 of them, they're happy because they're getting their needs met by being on his team. Why would they want to change? And the other 6, why are you beating me up? And so that's what you have to understand about this is this can only work if we make a fundamental change. I'll give you an example of an organization that I was in. We had a leader just like John. He had 2 clicks. And the senior administration in the organization needed for a change to occur, not because they wanted to, but because the rules had changed. And they needed to get rid of John. Remember, they needed John out of the way, or they needed John to change his behavior. Well, John said publicly and often, I'm not changing my behavior. And it became a situation where they eventually had to remove John. And then the decision becomes, who do you replace John with? And that's where, this is my final point. We'll go to our break. So that's what I'm asking you. Let's assume that we're going to remove John, so we're not seeming to be punishing the victims here. We're going to remove John. Who do we replace John with? And here are your three choices. We replace John with a member of his own clique. We replaced John with a member of the clique that was getting dominated, that wasn't having their needs met, or we replaced John with an outside person that was part of neither. Which of those three choices is the appropriate choice to make?
External outside person.
That is correct. The external outside person. If you run the risk of replacing John with a member of his clique, nothing will change. Just the new person, that group will still have their needs met, and that person will be the person that does that. If you replace that with one of the people who was not having them meet, then you're going to risk retribution. It'll be brutal. It'll be bloody. You've got to go outside to bring somebody in who has a clean slate and who can do these team building activities. So the organization that I was in, their first move was to replace John with a member of his own clique. They did that for a year. And it didn't change anything. It didn't get them where the organization needed to be. Again, they had external pressure to change. And to the point where they were going to go out of business if they didn't, because there's rules and regulations, and they couldn't meet the regulations to continue in business. And so the first move was pick one of his people. That didn't work. That only lasted a year. And then they understood the only way that we're going to get this change made is to go the external route. And that's what they did. So you've got to understand here that yes, you've got to replace John. You don't want to be punishing the victim, but you got to be very intentional about who you replace John with. And it can't be more of the same, or it can't be the group that's the opposition that's going to get into retribution. These are things that you should have learned in organizational culture. Hiring a consultant to come in and tell you these things legitimizes them, and that's a lot of what you're doing. Most of the time, organizations, they deep down know what the problem is, but they don't want to acknowledge it, and they don't want to be the person to blame. They bring a consultant in, and so you have to be truthful. You have to be the person who brings the hard truth.
Well,
And-
can I explain?
Sure.
Yeah, so I mean, when I was mentioning about hiring someone outside looking in, right?
Yeah.
We always talk about that. Isn't that, wouldn't you, even though when we click as consultants, we wouldn't have the job, but wouldn't that be somewhat similar to hiring a consultant?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's what a consultant does, is come in and tells people the truth. Remember that objective truth, we get through our data and our analytics. We don't come in and tell the political truth that's already going on in the organization, or personal truth, because we are trying to feather our own nest. Our job as consultants, and by extension leader, is the actual objective truth through data analysis. Now, whether they choose to go along with what you tell them or not is immaterial to you. You remember, you hand them your consultant's report, your action plan, and you run to the bank and try to cash the check before it bounces. But, you can't just tell them what they want to hear. You must tell them the objective truth that your data tells you.
Dr. Lamb, I have a question.
Yeah.
So my question is, just being in positional leaderships previously, when employees struggle, we typically kind of develop a plan. Sometimes it works, other times it doesn't. You know, what would make it so significant that we wouldn't give John an opportunity? Because my sense is thinking that, okay, if he got in this position, well, there was someone that hired him. If we weren't his boss per se, someone hired him because he whether he sent his representative when he interviewed well, or he looked well on paper, he was able to get the job. And depending upon how long he was actually in this leadership position, why would we fire him automatically, opposed to trying to pour into him the things that we want to see? And then, like we had suggested, if it doesn't work in 3 months, then certainly get rid of him, because we know that the culture, even though it's hard to measure, is the thing that really drives the organization.
And I
Well,
think that's where we were going to.
well, here's the real truth. In that
Okay.
3 months, he's going to burn your house down.
Okay.
That's it. I mean, John's out for John. I mean, that's very clear. And just telling John that he's got to change, what John's going to do is go after you now. He's going to try to leverage what personal power or political power he has, rather than change. He's going to go after you. And so, you know, what's the difference between somebody you try to improve and somebody that has to go? Somebody who you improve it has not crossed the line over into the personal power and the toxic culture. It's just they're not good at their job. They need some training or retraining. It's usually skill based.
Okay.
When you go over to the side when somebody's got to go, it's dispositional. They're unethical. They're dishonest. They're toxic.
Oh, yeah. Right.
So that's the delineation. If this was just a skill based thing, absolutely, we'd work with John. We'd put him on an action plan. He doesn't know how to use Excel, or he's not good with spreadsheets, or those things that we can improve. But we're not going to change the dispositional behaviors of fully formed adults. He's not going to become all honest and forthright and dependable and all of those things all of a sudden. So to me, it's very simple. If the problem with the leader is dispositional in nature, they're dishonest, they're unethical, they're bullies, they're toxic, those things, they've got to go. That's not going to change. And if you tell them they've got to change, they just double down. And their behavior becomes much worse. In my personal example that I was just talking about, the John that was in that organization, when they called him up the hill and said, "You got to do better," oh my goodness, he went nuts.
Okay. So my understanding of what you said is that if it's something that is skill based, then certainly it can be changed.
Exactly.
But if it's not, if it's like positional, like who he is, almost like in my world, like if they have a personality disorder, they got to want to change, and that's going to be very hard. So it makes it much more difficult.
Yeah. And
Okay.
so in the case that I'm talking about, they called him up the hill and said, "You got to quit this. You can't keep doing this. Your personal behavior, but also because of your personal behavior and your unwillingness to beat these new conditions that the organization is under to keep the funding coming. We've got to do this now. We have to be an accredited institution, or we can't continue to serve clients and charge money and get money. That you must change. Your personal behavior must change, but organizationally we must change." And they told him that, and then they called all us together and said there has to be a change. And if not, we'll make a change down the road here. But that happened. I want to think it was either February or March, but they let him continue on until maybe first week in July or something like that. About 5 or 6 months, 5 months, I'll say, was that period of he's got to get better. That 5 months, he burnt the house down. Lawsuits, 4 lawsuits, 5 actually, 5 lawsuits. He generated 5 lawsuits in 5 months that they all had to, that they had to pay out. He generated 5 lawsuits in 5 months. He burnt the house down. They're still paying on those lawsuits. So, but his behaviors were dispositional. It wasn't skill based. It was dispositional, and he went completely off the rails. It was, I'll show you, and he did. He did. And so that's why I'm telling you, if it's dispositional, telling him he's got to improve, oh, that's just red flag in front of the bull. You ain't seen nothing yet. You know, that's BTO reference this morning for all you old people who know who Bachman Turner Overdrive is. That song, you ain't seen nothing yet. I'll show you. Here, hold my beer. But you know, he pulled a Texas on him. Here, hold my beer. You ain't seen nothing yet. Generated 5 lawsuits in 5 months. You know, folks, it boils down to, and that's Sharice, thank you for that question. That it boils down to, if it's dispositional in nature, it's not going. You can't fix it. If it's skill based, yes, that's when we do action plans. Is when it's skill based. Absolutely, we're trying to improve somebody, put them on an improvement plan or action plan, or get them professional development. Absolutely. But when it's dispositional, soft skills, it will only add fuel to the fire. You know, insert metaphor here. All right, we're going to take a very quick break and come back. We've got one more presentation, and then I'm going to do a quick and dirty from Qualtrics XL. I'm gonna do a quick and dirty as kind of to close us out today. So be back at 12, and we'll go.
Okay. Don't we have one more group?
Yeah, we'll be back
Okay.
at 12 for the last group.
Oh, okay.
We're just gonna take a 5-minute break. I'm old.
Doc, you had a question?
Yeah, you're probably as old as I am.
Okay, I can wait.
Doc, if you got a question, I can stay on.
Yes, my question was related. I know that I feel like many of us on here do come from that service-oriented or working in education sort of mindset where there's always room for improvement. We're going to develop this person. But how would you maybe give advice to maybe even a young professional or even someone older who maybe does struggle performance-wise on the job, and you know and it may be a skill deficit, but they could be at risk of getting let go. I feel like a lot of organizations, they'll go through the motions of like, hey, we're going to try to work with you to try to improve this, and but
They're really
they
not.
still make the decision to let you go. Yeah, they're really not.
Yeah, they're just doing the EEOC thing. I get it.
Yeah.
You know, they're just putting the checks in the boxes so that they can say we tried to improve them and did an action plan and it didn't work, and in the end the outcome was already predetermined. That's an unethical organization. And for the person involved in that, take advantage of my recommendation to them is take advantage of the training that they're providing you to increase your personal tool chest, the things that you can and can't do and improve your skill set, but also you know that it's time to launch from that organization, that they're not really invested in you, and that they're just going through the motions. part of hiring young people is understanding that you've got to induct them in the organization. They're not going to be good out of the box. I probably hired 300 or 400 teachers in my career, and I hired one who was good out of the box. Now, does that mean that I'm not a good hire? No, that none of them are good out of the box. That you've got to work with them to develop their skill set. If they have the right dispositional behaviors, then I can help them. The ones that we didn't keep were the ones that didn't have the right dispositional behaviors. It wasn't about their skills, it was about their dispositional behaviors, how they treated others, how they treated kids, their behaviors. They were irresponsible, came in with the same clothes they had on the day before, 6 bar stamps on their hand. That it was they weren't responsible, they weren't ethical, they weren't legal and moral. Those are the ones, but the ones that was just a skill deficit, we were more than willing to work with them. And because we knew they all were going to have a skill deficit as young people. And so we had a professional growth plan that all young people were involved in. It was automatic for all of them. It wasn't just we singled you out. Let me share my screen and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Let's see if I can find it. Call mine MTSS for teachers. MTSS is multi-tiered system of support. We do it for students. Why don't we do it for teachers? And so this is mine. And so the notion here is we're going to use whole group, small group, and one-on-one coaching, but we're going to, beginning teachers, we start them from day one. We understand that we're going to have to get them ready to go. We're not going to be surprised or disappointed when they don't have the skill set that to make themselves successful right out of the box. That should be an organizational expectation. That one that I had, Stephanie Showing, and all that, 20-something years of doing that one, she was the anomaly. She was not the norm. She was the anomaly. But too many organizations think that have it backwards. They think that everybody ought to be ready to go when they're hired. No, the assumption is we're going to have to work on their skill development. And we're going to have to work on them. See, over here, this is not about their dispositional behaviors. This is classroom management. This is high yield strategies, questioning, cluing, how to actually teach. Because that's the skills we need for them to develop. Their skill set, actually how you teach. There's 9 high yield strategies: questioning, cluing, how to use homework, non-linguistic representation, how to manage cooperative learning. These are classroom management. These are a skill set that's not dispositional behaviors. We understand when we're looking to hire somebody, a beginner, a young person, we're just looking at the raw materials. We're looking at their dispositional behaviors. Are they the right kind of person for this? We'll teach them the job once we get them. We can't blame them for not knowing the job, not having the skill set. What we can't live with is if they don't have the dispositional behavior, that they're late every day, if they come in still hungover. I think back to Jack Black in the movie School of Rock. He came in, he was a substitute teacher, and they said, the teacher's drunk. And he said, no, I'm hungover. That means I was drunk yesterday.
Right.
That kind of thing. We can't live with that. Somebody who's dishonest. In my school law class, the first case study is a teacher illegally manipulates a grading scale to fail a kid for the year. We can't do things like that. Unethical, illegal behavior, having sex with students, or we can't have those kinds of dispositional things. But
Mhm.
it's an organizational problem if we don't know that we have to induct our young people into it and work on their skill set.
Right.
That's not their problem. That's the organization not being realistic. And when you get in a leadership position in an organization, you have to understand you need to design a system of onboarding for your young people that focuses on their skill set.
Mhm.
But I'm gonna tell you right now, it's a fool's errand to try to change people's dispositional behaviors. It never goes well. And so when I train my folks to go out and interview for initial administrative jobs, and that's who I train is, do principal preparation, is I have a document of the 5 dispositional soft skills that they should highlight in their interview. Because that's really what we're looking for. Is this the right person? Do they have the right dispositional behaviors? We'll teach them on the job what they need to know. We'll have a system for them, whether they're teachers or whether they're administrators, but they're still new. And so here's that document that I use. It's a part of a bigger interviewing system that I have, and it is a big system. It has a number of documents and goes through 4 levels of different types of interviews. But here's what's important. 5 dispositional to showcase in an interview. When you're going for a job, we're trying to figure out who to hire. I'm not so much interested in your hard skills. Your skill set. I need to know about your dispositional behaviors. Emotional intelligence, is what we refer to in work ethic, positive attitude, communication skills, time management, and self-confidence. Those are the things. If you've got those things, I can work with you on the hard skills. But if you don't have those things, if you don't have those things, I can't fix those things. So the things that we really need to focus on. I'm not sure that I've answered your question, but if you are the young person, you take advantage of the opportunities that they get and you look for something else if you know that this is just going through the motions. But really, as a young person, as beginners in the organization, you really need to focus hard on developing those skills and making, and so that you can show value and impact. You really need to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a great question. But, I'm not big on postponing the inevitable. If it's dispositionally based, I don't have a lot of faith that people can change, that part of who they are. And so now, fully understanding, full disclosure, I'm still Saul on the road to Damascus. I'm not Paul yet. I'm still trying to change, and I'm a lot older than y'all. And I'm still trying to change. I don't know that I'll ever get there. I'm trying, but it's a big deal to change your dispositional behaviors.
Dr. Lamb, can I also ask another question? Because I was listening to your conversation and just wanting to piggyback on your response. So one of the things is that we were talking about, you were talking about the gentleman causing 5 lawsuits.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, because sometimes we might need to show our effort before we let somebody go, because they may say, they may scream discrimination, whatever the case might be. So how do we kind of document those things that are required for employment per se? Because we can't really measure toxic work culture. That's not something that we can really measure. So, how would we avoid like the lawsuit, I guess, on the front end rather than the back end?
Well, what you're talking about is data. I mean, you've got enough data right in front of you from this survey and these responses to take a job action if you want to. Now, what I've also been involved in is an outside, the person was put on suspension and an outside person was coming in and they conducted those HR interviews and asked those specific questions. And as a result, that person was let go and they tried to sue, but the data was there. I mean, you know, for some reason, we think that you've got to have all this data. Now, when we're talking about performance, skill-based, yeah, you got to have a bunch, but dispositional, you know, if you can show that this person is doing these bad things, you know, you don't get protected if you're doing bad things to folks. If it's just skill-based, back to, you know, back to Doc's question, if it's just skill-based, you know, yeah, we're going to try to help improve that person. But there's certain things in an organization that you just can't allow dispositionally. And if you've got that data, you don't have to document their performance. You got to document performance for a long time. But again, that's skill. But if it's dispositional, you don't have to document that forever. There's certain things that we just can't live with in an organization. And you know, you have no job protection on those things. If you misbehave, you don't have, EEOC doesn't protect misbehavior.
Gotcha. Thanks.
You gotta, it protects skill-based, and have we tried to improve your skill level? But it does not protect bad, you know, bad or illegal or, you know, behavior does not get protected by EEOC. Does not. So again,
I guess
differentiation here in an action plan and dismissal is it skill-based? We go to the action plan. Is it dispositional? We can go for dismissal if it's illegal, immoral, unethical. You know, that's the delineation. Why is, you know, it's not just it is something happening that we don't like. Yeah. Why? What is it what is that behavior that's unacceptable? Is it skill-based? Is it performance? Yep, we'll work on that. We can help you with that piece. But these
Now,
other things, no.
Do you think it's difficult as a leader? Well, I think it is difficult as a leader, I think, but what are your thoughts on distinguishing what is unethical versus what's legal? If someone, let's say, they join a board, all right, for an organization that may be similar, but there's nothing stipulated as far as like a conflict of interest or any sort of competition agreement, do you feel like that is means to termination as a leader, even though it wasn't stipulated within any sort of agreement, work agreement?
Well, Gardner Webb is working through that right now. As a matter of fact, but there's two pieces to that. That's a great question. There's two pieces to that. There's conflict of interest, and there's also conflict of engagement. That's the second piece of that conflict of interest policy. And so your organization has to develop and state there's nothing that you can't do it and put it in your handbook anytime you want to. But you must develop a conflict of interest policy and a subset of conflict of engagement that goes along with it. So we had a person at Gardner Webb who said, I'd like to run for the town board. And the adjudication came back was no, that's a conflict of engagement. And so, but it was written into the policy.
Right. There was a clause for that.
Yes.
So if there wasn't a clause, would the employer have any sort of power in that sort of interaction?
It only if the time that you were there conflicted with the time that you were supposed to be at your organization. They don't have to be a policy if it's a time conflict. You know, one of the first things you learn in physics is there's a time-space continuum. You can only be at one place at one time. And so there's a follow-up with that in terms of, is this a salaried employee or is this an hourly employee?
I was thinking the same thing. Yes.
Now, quite recently, I got called in on one actually this week, where the employee says, I need to do this to keep my license. And I said, you know, but the problem is you're a salaried employee. They can tell you no, because it conflicts with the time that you're supposed to be working with them. Well, but I'm not going to do this. I'm going to do this on the weekend. It doesn't matter. It doesn't, you know, your job is as a salaried employee is they may need you to do this same kind of thing for the organization, nights or weekends as well. And that would be a conflict of engagement. Now, if you're an hourly employee and your work hours are defined as, you know, 8 to 5, and there's not a policy that prohibits you, they can't keep you from doing the same job that you do for them during that time if you're salaried, and if there's unless there's a policy that says you can't. But if you're an hourly employee, if you're salaried, you know, so even though there might not be a written policy, you're not to engage in other outside activities during the time that you would be with them. Either way, you know, so if you wanted to do a board work for another organization and you're hourly, as long as you don't do it between 8 and 5, you're good. If there's no policy on the books. If you're a salaried employee, they don't have to have one on the books. You can't do that.
So it could be a conflict. Yeah, they'll bring up conflict of engagement, or they have power there.
Yes.
Okay, that's
absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, understanding, I'm talking about North and South Carolina. Why am I making sure that that's clear? North and South Carolina are right to work states. That means that the employer has a lot, you know, no unions. Unions are illegal in North Carolina, South Carolina. Unions are illegal. And the employer has these rights and you don't as the employee. We call those right to work states. And so now if we were in a union state, it would be different. But understanding the rules that you work under. Now, there are people who claim, well, there's a union. No, those are just professional organizations. They may portray themselves as union, like NCAE and things for teachers like that. They're not really unions, though. You don't have protections in those. And so, yeah, we get into those things. All right, our last group is ready to present, I'm hoping.
Yes, we are. I just had to start talking before I couldn't just jump out there and do it. All right. Richard, can you all see the screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Our group, last but definitely not least, will be presenting on case study 16A. In our group are myself, Richard Brown, Doc Dillard, Brenda McCormick, and Heidi Neely. Next slide, please. In this case study, we are given some mixed method data, both qualitative and quantitative data that really helps frame what's going on in this scenario. What we can kind of deduce from the data is that this is likely a group of 12 individuals that's led by a person named John. Next slide, please. What we hope to accomplish in this presentation are 3 core things. One, we hope to diagnose the team's strengths and weaknesses based on what the data says or based on evaluating the data. 2, we hope to create an intervention or an action plan or really address those gaps or those weaknesses that exist in the organization. And then finally, we want to make recommendations on how to develop a more functional and effective team, honoring what the data tells us. Next slide, please. So as we get started and we kind of interrogate what are the positive, what are the pros, what is the data telling us that's good in this situation. There's a few things that we can walk away with from the data understanding. One, there are clear understandings of individual roles and responsibilities by team members. Two, there's clear understanding how teams contribute to the organization's goals. Three, there seems to be a shared consensus by and large that that there's effective decision making that occurs on the team. There's a clear understanding of larger goals, and there seems to be a shared commitment or understanding that the team in general gets the job done. I'll pass it on to my colleague Heidi now.
All right, thank you. So as we discussed this morning about what the results of this survey show is, that there is with the clicks that some feel like the team is high performing, some feel that unless you're on John's side, there's, you're on the wrong side. You got to be under John. The lack of trust, team morale is low. The meeting effectiveness, the job satisfaction. So these are what the numbers are showing with, as we've determined, it's just really kind of not reliable data, the biased data here, but it's a start. It's something to show what's going on in this team. And so prioritizing those opportunities for improvement, just looking at where there's the most dissatisfaction, being with the conflict resolution, and that job satisfaction. Okay, next slide, please. So presenting this data, we use this pie chart to kind of visualize where the team agrees strongly or disagrees, just as a base. And as consultants, using this to show the mode in this, as far as the central tendency using the mode. You can also just examine the pros and cons. You can, look at the data and say, like, see the polar opposites, the number that disagree and the number that agrees with the questions on the survey. And so in that, it brings up, we all discussed that in number 5, how only 10 of the 12 responded. And so for me, I was just like, well, what is that called? What do you call that when not everybody responds? And so looking at the non-response bias and I found out that is pretty much when either the person can't answer the questions or they just choose not to answer the questions. There may be something that, comes into play where, based on certain groups, like John's groups, the ones that are, support John, they may have been excited to answer these questions, like, great. But then you have those other who feel ostracized, or they don't feel part, or they don't feel supported. They may not have really cared about this survey at all, because why? Like, they're not satisfied with this job. So what is it going to change? John is still going to be the leader. You're going to listen to the positivity in those people. So considering that non-response bias was something that we also looked at when discussing this case study. Okay, next slide, please. So this is where we bring up our secondary problems. And of course, the culture of the organization, and just there's no trust coming when you come into work at this place. The lack of being able to give constructive feedback at times. What are we here for? We do our work, but there's just no harmony. There's just no pride in what we do. And then also the conflict. When you're not able to receive or give constructive feedback, that causes problems. That's when you do click up you want to just work in your own space. You don't want to collaborate. You don't want to have that team dynamic. And then also with that, as I was listening to the presentations today, I wondered, and looking at the qualitative responses about how, we don't support each other as a team, or we wait until John makes decisions and announces them rather than taking the initiative. And so that made me wonder, like, so what is the
other clique that doesn't agree, I mean, like, are they waiting, like laying low, waiting to like throw John under the bus? Because if they're allowing John to make these decisions, then yeah, I would, maybe they're plotting right now, and the survey just is kind of about to expose that. Because that would be, grounds. Let's throw them under the bus and get them to make a decision that doesn't work well for the organization. And then also the individual, of course, the job satisfaction. Why would you be excited about going to work at a place where there's division or there's not, you have no voice? So this is where we determined those secondary problems. And now I'll turn it over to Brenna.
So we took a look at Patrick Lenciani's 5 dysfunctions of a team, and we realized that the 2 foundational pieces of this pyramid are trust and conflict, both of which are missing in this team. There's an absence of trust and there's fear of conflict. They don't like to embrace it. And as we've talked about today, that obviously stems from their leadership, John, and the divisive culture that he has created. So this team does not work as a team. There's dysfunction in it. There's a clique mentality. Not everyone feels like he or she's an integral part of this team who can help make decisions. This is breeding a lack of initiative amongst team members. It's contributing to low morale and job satisfaction. And really, they're missing a foundational part of high-performing teams as a result of John's inability to lead. Next slide. So we came up with some possible solutions, very similar to some of the other solutions we've heard from other groups today. One being the team building and just really encompassing just a team atmosphere. This often gets a bad rap as like being lame or unnecessary, or groups don't want to participate, but it does build trust, mitigate conflict, encourages communication, increases collaboration, all of which would directly strengthen weaknesses that were mentioned in our central problem. But the cons here is that we're still not addressing John. We're addressing the team as a whole, and John has to be dealt with first. There's already tension within this group, and there's definite cliques that we're going to have to navigate. They have their own separate subcultures that, as Dr. Lamb has said, you've got to deal with them separately before you can all bring them all to the table. And then another possible is conflict management, what kind of goes along with team building and that idea of just providing professional development. This obviously would help people within the group to communicate more effectively with individuals that may have different work or personality styles. That can provide some open dialogue with the team as they work for constructive solutions. But again, if there's no leadership in place that is going to support this in an ongoing way, and we go to a day or a week or a month or yearly training, but then we go back to that exact same work environment, it doesn't really matter. So that's a con there. And there's going to be unresolved issues that we have to deal with, which can be difficult, and it can be challenging for immediate project management.
All right, so that leads us into our third solution, which is recognizing achievement. So we have a statistic, or actually a quote rather, from Center for Creative Leadership, that team norms should be established and cleared so there could be agreed behavior. So a part of that is dealing with recognizing achievement. It should be done to motivate employees and also build overall value within the organization. And we did have in our discussion, Richard discuss how there is an in-group and an out-group. We know that Henry Tajorel correlates team leaders showing favoritism to people who are similar to them. We need to ensure that we have objective ways to measure achievement within this group so there isn't any favoritism. And we'll discuss a bit of that as we move forward. All right, preferred solution, team building. We really need to get this team together, addressing any internal conflict that they have, giving them strategies to develop as a whole and as a collective so they can move past some of these discrepancies. which we'll see within the action plan. All right, so within our action plan, we have 3 main activities. Okay. All right, so we have dissemination of survey data, team building training, and setting norms. So when looking at dissemination of survey data, as we alluded to previously, I think it's very important that they have data seen in various ways. Data should be seen in various ways. It should be both visual, as well as showing the numerical or quantitative data as well. This also reminded me of in past classes, we discussed sociograms. Sociograms are very important to understand the interrelationships within an organization. I think that this is something that should be done with a consultant for this organization, and particularly this team. Perhaps an external party, maybe a higher up or someone who's above John, should be working with the consultant to look at the sociogram so we can really break down this team's dynamic. We also gave a timeline. All of this dissemination of data should be done within the first 2 months, and it should be reviewed every 12 weeks or so. As far as needed resources, of course, there needs to be time. Location is very important. Presentation of the data should be addressed as well. Qualtrics should be looked at. I also mentioned Tableau. So Tableau is a data visualization software that could be utilized for this team, particularly looking at achievement, to make things objective. They could use more accountability tools such as Tableau. So what were some indicators of success? We said the survey information is conveyed to the team in a timely fashion. Also, the team understands the relevance of data results. So it's one thing presenting this information in a visual form, but they also need to understand its impact and why it is utilized for the organization. And of course, outcomes are important. Secondly, we talked about team building training. So we touched on discussing conflict management styles and effective communication. I think that could be necessary for developing that psychological safety within the organization. So that will help that those 5 dysfunctions of a team at addressing any trust issues or any fear of conflict by them being able to share any issues or concerns they have in an open fashion. So having an open door policy. This could be done with a consultant or other organizational leader, similar to looking at the data. Someone who's above John would be helpful to have that objective eye. Eventually, once rapport is built within the teams, because it's a gradual process, maybe John can have a little bit more of that responsibility at being that manager and leader within the team to kind of go over those results with his staff. So some of the results, we will know that this would have been successful by a cultural change, trust, and also positive satisfaction from surveys. Finally, setting norms is very important. So with setting norms, that goes to having set policies on communication. Are we going to have more of an open door policy so we aren't just building and destroying or eradicating workability within our organization? We need to be looking at performance expectations. Do we have certain metrics that we're turning to when we're making evaluations? And then also looking at recognizing achievement, as we alluded to. How are we doing this in a very systematic, fair way for the organization so we cannot be accused of favoritism or having these in-groups within our organization? People who are held accountable for that, we just say that all stakeholders should be held accountable. So what are some resources? Time, location, written policies and consequences, accountability tools, surveys, focus groups, and also incentives would be helpful. So this isn't something that John can do alone. It's something that he maybe needs to reach up within our organization to get support in establishing so that there aren't any gaps. All right. Some other things that I wanted to discuss is I think it's very important to progress monitor. And we've talked about this or touched on this, reviewing that survey information, perhaps doing a gap analysis later on to compare how we initially looked at that data, though there were issues. But once we clean that data, we could evaluate it and see how we have improved or how we have regressed. But it'll be very important for us to do that. We can always do 360 feedback surveys as well to see if there's any cultural shifts. So in summary, we see that this organization and this team in particular utilize qualitative and quantitative data in order to determine that there were issues within leadership. The organization needs to place resources in, to cultivate a better team culture and actually make a more functional team. So with these, with progress monitoring and these changes being placed, hopefully, because we also know that nothing is foolproof, hopefully the organization can shift with these recommendations. So thank you so much for listening to us.
Great. All right, I'm going to shift gears. That's a great presentation. Again, I like your action plan. I always like action plans. You know, and a graphic organizer, you'll always be my favorite if you do that. I'm not much on perk charts. I can't figure them out. I like graphic organizer action plans. Let's go beyond what we read in this case study for a minute, and then we're going to get to our last section today. What if the 6 people that were not part of John's team were females? What if they were people of color? Would that change your perspective on this case? That would throw this clearly over on the dispositional side, would it not? We would know immediately, oh, this guy's got a problem.
Could you repeat that question one more time? I'm sorry.
What if we identified that the 6 people that were not on John's team were either female or persons of color? Would that bring more clarity to this case? Would it then highlight the notion that it's dispositional behaviors? Of course it would, but it won't always be that clear. But just because you can't physically see, oh, he's discriminating against women or people against color, that's a dispositional behavior. But he's still discriminating against those people, whether it's based on race or gender. It's still a dispositional problem. There's something wrong. Something's wrong with John.
Would the people in his group have to be white men for us to kind of draw that conclusion?
Well, I mean, if we needed something that concrete, I mean, if we needed that, but yes, but what if all the people in his clique were white men and all the people who weren't were women and people of color?
I think that goes back to a hiring problem too, right? We got to start with the way we hired. I think so. Yeah. I serve as a university investigator, and I've investigated EEO concerns, Title IX, and all those things. And I think the hard part in this is that there's very little detail, right, on any pieces. So, go ahead.
My point, Harry, is we actually have enough information. We know that 6 people are getting discriminated against. You know, it may be gender based, and it may not be. It may be racially based. It may not be. But 6 people are getting discriminated against. 6 people. This leader's dispositional behavior is causing a toxic culture for 6 people. It may not always be as easy as they're all minority or they're all female. It may not be, but we have the data that we need to know that in an organization, we can't discriminate against half of our employees for whatever reason. You know, that's the kind of the bottom line for me in this case study is it won't always be as black and white or male and female, but we still have irrefutable data here that 6 people are getting discriminated against, and it's dispositionally based. I can't fix that, people. I can't change what's in somebody's heart, their dispositional behaviors. I can't change that. So the question, you know, the kind of the bottom line for me in this whole case study is, what do we do with John? If it's skill-based, we can work with John. You know, I'll pick on Reed again. Recently in a police department that I'm aware of, a fellow was let go over his skills, his shooting scores and his physical, his PT. He filed a grievance and he won because they didn't do anything to help him on those things. Now, if they'd have said, you know, this is dispositionally based, they, you know, that they did not try to improve his skill set. And that's where the EEOC part comes in. If you don't try to improve somebody's skill set, yeah, they're going to have a grievance against you. But if it's dispositionally based, then you know, this is not the appropriate person for this organization or for this job because of the dispositional behavior. We've got 6 people that are being discriminated against for whatever reason. We can clearly point to that in this case. So that's the delineation. I get this question every semester. What, you know, why are you going after John? Well, there's certain things that we can't allow in the organization. There's too much legal exposure. There's too many grounds for lawsuits and turnover. Even if people don't sue us, they leave. And we can't have a revolving door in our organizations. We can't bring about any stability. The data is clear here that 6 people are getting discriminated against. What are you going to do? Well, it's not a skill issue. This is a dispositional behavior issue with John. It's not skill based. He may be a wizard with Excel, spreadsheets, and all those things. That's not the issue here. These are things that you have to be able to identify. Is this fixable or not? You know, and changing what's in people's hearts, that's really a hard fix. You know, that's not something that I think that we have to understand our limitations as leaders and consultants. We can't fix broken people. We can work on skill sets, but we can't fix the other. Excellent presentation today. I continue to see you bring in things that you've learned previously. I told you that's what this course is about, is beginning to put it all together with methodology. Now, I want to share with you a Excel-based report that comes out of Qualtrics, and so let me share my screen. All of you have differing levels of ability, quite sure, in Excel. But what's important is that you know what a spreadsheet is and how to use it or how not to use it. And so if I can get it to pop up here, come on, you can do it. This is what the spreadsheet, when you do a survey in Qualtrics, it comes out and looks this. Now it will give us, you know, our mean, median. It will give us some averages and those kinds of things. But again, what we're really interested in, we'll look at one of the questions. My team works together. This is what we're talking about. Now, she used a 5-point scale because she had to. She's replicating the study. We're not real happy about that, but that's what she did. And so she's reported the scores. This is mode. This is what Excel will do for us coming out. It reports the mode. You know, and so here I've done this for you. A great deal would be 5, quite a bit, some degree, very little, or not at all. So that's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And so that 5 means quite a bit. And so that's what we're talking about, is reporting the mode. And so we can see on that particular questions, I've added them up for you here. We've got 5 that say a great deal about my team, quite a bit. We see those. And so now, this is what's important, is this mode, not the averages, you know, which is over here. This is what's important. Not these averages over here, the mode. And you say, all right, Dale, so that tells us our story. We can also generate a default report, which will even make it even better for us coming out of this, where we can use our mode again. Let me see. Let me go back to this. And it's got the questions, and it's got these, and it's wonderful, and it totals them up for us and gives us our count and gives us our, you know, our percentages and those kinds of things. But where this really helps us here is it gives us, you know, it gives us our numbers over here. You can see this. And so the next level that you would do for your project is to make sure that this data is not an outlier, because we don't have anything to compare it to. We can't compare this to a larger population or to a different group. In action research, remember, you're working with a convenient sample, one particular group. And so that level of, you know, is this data real? Did it happen by chance or error? Is this an outlier group or whatever? And so the next logical step that we would do with this data is we would do a chi-square goodness of fit. What is chi-square goodness of fit? Well, chi-square basically produces a theoretical model and says, are these results as a chance of, we're not talking about what they say, we're talking about technique now. We're talking about technique, chance and error. Remember, significance only speaks to chance and error. It doesn't talk about what we actually learned from the data. It tells us the efficacy of the data. Was this likely to occur? And again, at the 0.05, 5% tolerance of error, that what we found was from chance or error. It was a technique issue. And so what we do is we plug these numbers over here in this column. We can total them up again. We can them ourselves from here. You can see it's the same numbers, and I just counted how many 4s and 5s, you know, and totaled them up and put the key down here. But this default report does the same thing. Now, if we want to do some averages and standard deviations, that's pretty simple. We can just highlight the column and use the functions up here, the formulas. We can do that. You know, we can sum them, and we can do all those different things. We know how to do that. But for our purposes, I like this default report because I can take, it's already counted all of them for me, and I can just take and plug these values into a chi-square goodness of fit calculator, and it tells me that I can have confidence that this data is real. Whatever the data tells me, and we're not talking about what the data tells me now. I need to have confidence that this data is real. That's what statistical significance is. This kind of, you know, this is kind of the culmination of the first part of the quantitative part of this course up through chapter 6. And that's what we're doing. We've highlighted, we've hit everything that's in those first 6 chapters. And now we're talking about, how do I know my data is real? Well, we have to do statistical significance. We do that on survey data by using chi-square goodness of fit. We simply pull up a goodness of fit calculator. Let me see if I've got this over here, if I can do it without it taking me all morning. Let's see. So I come up here to my bookmarks, and I come down here to chi-square. I've got it already saved, and here it is. Chi-square calculator for goodness fit. Sociostatistics.com has this. This is the one I want. It's not my data is real or not. It's not going to speak to what the data means at all. It's just going to speak to chance and error. This is what we do to make sure that we are professional and honest and ethical in what we do. And so I simply come here, and in my categories, As you can see, I already fill these in, so I can just do this. All right, so there's my categories. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Next. I take my values from here. This is my observed values right here. 0, 0, 1, 7, 11. All right, so I do, it's 0, 0, 1, 7, and 11. Now, the only other thing that I need to know is what is my expected value? Well, that's very simple. I've got 19 respondents, and they can choose any of 5 different categories to put their answer in. So I divide 19 by 5 and come up with 3.8. Because they can answer any of the 5. They're not limited to, so the potential is 3.8 for each of these. And my level is, again, for social sciences is 0.5. I calculate my chi-square, and it tells me right there, the p-value is the result at p is less than or greater, less than or equal to 0.05. So I know that those answers are real. They're not due to chance or error. I do that with all of them, and it'll generate a p-value for every one of those. And so when somebody says, how do I know that this wasn't random or this was error or chance? I ran my chi-square goodness of fit. Very simple. That's it. Easy peasy. And it does me a default report where it already tells me what my numbers are in the order that I just put my responses in. You just saw me do it. That's how you do a chi-square goodness of fit. And we know that data is real, not from chance or error. Now, it does not, again, it does not speak to what the data tells me, whether it's meaningful or not. Statistical significance does not mean meaningful, impactful. It simply speaks to chance or error. It speaks to our technique. And that double checks our technique. We're good to go. Amazing how that works. So to finish up the first section here, the first section of the book is don't confuse significance with meaningful. They do not mean the same thing. Significance speaks to your technique. Meaningful speaks to your outcome of your data. If you can keep those two square, you're good to go. I have tried during the first part here. We're trying to make statistics real for you. How do you use them in real life? When do you use them? Why do you use them? Not just can you do the calculus or not. I mean, I don't have to worry about the formula for chi-square, although I do know what it is, because in my day they made us do them by hand on a big board in front of everybody so they could poke fun at you. And in my doctoral statistics classes, but we don't do that anymore. It's just like people who came right before me had to use a slide rule. I got to use a calculator when I was an undergraduate at NC State. We used a HP 25, a Hewlett Packard 25, and you can do more with a free calculator now, and those things cost a fortune back then. And then Texas Instruments came along while I was an undergraduate. I had a TI 75 that was programmable, but again, it's not can you do the calculus, it's how and when to use it and why you use it. That's important. That's what this course is supposed to teach you, how to put these tools into place, when to use them, how to use them, why you should or shouldn't be using them, those kinds of things. Back to the case study today. When do you get rid of John? Well, when it's dispositional. Can't fix that. Can't fix stupid. That's the notion here. If it's skill based, we're on John. We're going to help John improve. You know, take away from this is the quantitative data didn't match the qualitative. We got a problem. What's wrong? Well, the quantitative data was collected inappropriately and then it was summarized or analyzed inappropriately. We should have been looking at the mode rather than the averages. Again, that speaks to technique. Got to know a lot of stuff to be good at this, but it's a little at a time. We're growing, we're learning. The good part is you've got such a great skill set coming out of your core foundational courses. You can plug that stuff in now. It makes sense to you. Oh, that's why I learned this. This is where I apply that in the real world. That's why I said don't get in a hurry to get here. You got to learn something along the way. I can't help you if you don't have any tools when you get here. But you folks demonstrate every week that you've got the skill set, you've got the tools. Now we just got to apply the knowledge of how and when to use it. You did a great job on your case studies today. You picked up on the problems that were there, and you had wonderful solutions as well. Action plans, team building. You plugged in the stuff you learned to begin with, and that's when to apply and what to apply. And so I'm very pleased. Your answers to your questions are good. Your reflections are good. The answers to your, the big questions from each of the chapters. Your presentations are professionally done. You're getting there. You're where you need to be. If you had a better teacher, if we let Dr. Neal teach you rather than me, y'all are probably doing a whole lot better. You're only limited by my ability right now. The sky's the limit for y'all. Y'all are you're doing great. This is the time for the big pep talk. We're a third of the way through. The first third you have successfully completed. We don't have anybody that's straggling behind. Everybody's doing well.
Okay, so everybody gets
a rattle, whatever that is. So yeah, we're doing great. All right.
That's my tambourine, Dr. Lamb.
Good for you. Questions you have for me?
Dr. Lamb, I did at a request of our assistant superintendent, I did a bus analysis because they didn't hire me for the transportation director, and the director is incapable of running his own data. I pulled that data. Would you be willing to glance over what I have and kind of see if there's some statistical things I could add into that to give it more value?
Yep. Be more than happy to look at the data. So in conclusion today, we run a lot of t-tests for significance, but we have to have score data to do it. So that's kind of the final question that I always get at the end of this class is, why did we run chi-square and not a t-test? Well, a t-test means that there's a right answer to the question. In survey, there is no right answer. You can pick any of them. Again, you can pick any of the 5. There is no right answer in survey. When you're doing opinion and satisfaction and agreement surveys, there is no right answer. Pick whatever you want. We use t-test and z-test. T-test is like the same group. We test them. We do a treatment. We test them again. T-test is that significant? What we found, that change, is it significant? But the test was like a math test. It had a right answer. We use a t-test. We use a z-test same way. We test the sample and then we test the population and compare them. But again, it's a test. There has to be a right answer. When there is no right answer, when it's opinion survey, we simply use chi-square, goodness fit, to make sure that we don't have an error from chance or just bubbling error or whatever. It only checks our technique. It does not speak to our outcomes. It just checks our technique because there is no right or wrong answer. So that's the difference that you get if you have a test that has a correct answer, like 2 + 2 is 4. We run t-test on single samples, and we run z-test on population back to sample, or sample back to population. Survey, we pull that sample out of that bigger population, and we survey them. We run chi-square goodness of fit to make sure we're checking for error and chance. Does not speak again to outcomes. So that's kind of the conclusion of the first section of the quantitative piece of this course. All right, it's 1 o'clock. I look forward to these. It's like Jackson Brown said, the only time that seems too short is the time we get to play. This is it for me. I enjoy it. Thank you for playing along. I hope you, it's not too boring, but I love these Saturdays and I love the work that you're doing. I
They
will
did a
see
great
you.
job.
Yes, I will see you in 2 weeks. Everybody stay safe.
Have a
Thank
great
you.
week.
Bye-bye.